There was an FBI informant who committed several grisly murders in Colorado, USA, in just 2 years. Some investigators even suspected that as many as 21 unsolved murders were linked to him. He would carefully select his victims and then use he used deception to lure his victims, killing them and then transporting them to remote areas for disposal. This made it difficult for the police to link him to the crimes. His name was Scott Lee Kimball, and he was also known as the real-life Hannibal. Kimball was born on September 21, 1966, in Boulder County, Colorado. But he was actually raised in Lafayette and educated at Lafayette Elementary School. His elementary school classmates recall that he was not very popular, introverted, and did not interact much with others. A few years later, Kimball's mother fell in love with another woman and came out as a lesbian. His father was furious and eventually divorced his wife, moved to Montana, and remarried shortly thereafter. Because his parents divorced, so Kimball moved in with his grandmother. That's where he met Theodore Payton, who was a pedophile. That period in Kimball's life was undoubtedly his toughest. His family broke up, leaving him feeling inferior and alone. It was at this time that Theodore took advantage of his vulnerability and gradually won his trust by giving him gifts and superficial attention. During this time, Kimball feels a long-lost sense of joy, and they even go on weekly trips to a cabin by the reservoir to play video games together. However, for Theodore, these so-called friendships and care are just a means to an end. They're tools he uses to achieve his real goal, which is to sexually assault Kimball. One night, while Kimball was in the shower, Theodore came into the bathroom and offered to wash his back. Kimball said it was okay, and then Theodore started to touch Kimball's body. As time went on, Theodore's behavior became bolder. He forced Kimball to take indecent photographs. As Kimball reached puberty, his behavior became more egregious. It progressed from initial fondling to sexual assault and forcing Kimball to take hundreds of indecent photographs. Kimball tried to resist, but Theodore threatened him with violence and warned him not to tell his parents about these behaviors. In one extreme incident, Theodore even threatened Kimball with a gun, saying that his parents' lives would be in danger if he told anyone about what was going on. When Kimball followed his father and brother to Hamilton, Montana, to attend high school, he thought things might improve. However, whenever he returned to Colorado, Theodore would still sexually abuse him. Kimball got his first felony conviction at 22 years old for using a blank check at a hotel in Montana. That same year, he was arrested in Missoula County for using a blank check to break into 2 homes in Bloomfield and steal a fishing pole and 2 rifles and a shotgun. But he was sentenced to probation and avoided jail time. Meanwhile, Theodore's sexually abusive behavior deeply traumatized Kimball and even made him suicidal. At the age of 23, he traveled with his brother on a hunting trip to western Montana. However, he was so depressed that he couldn't get excited about the hunt. One night, Kimball was alone in his room and picked up a rifle. After thinking it over, he pointed it at his forehead and pulled the trigger. The bullet only grazed his forehead though, and he wasn't killed, just spent several days in the hospital. The suicide attempt later, Kimball spent some time in the hospital, thinking things over. When he was discharged from the hospital, he and a few other young men told the Boulder County Sheriff's Department about Theodore's sexually abusive behavior. A few months later, Theodore was convicted on 6 counts of child sexual abuse and sentenced to 7 years in prison. Kimball also wrote a letter to the judge, pleading with him to increase Theodore's sentence. In the letter he wrote, "He denied me the right to a normal, healthy, innocent childhood, and he has ruined my life forever." When the police asked Theodore if he regretted the sexual abuse, he simply replied, "That was a long time ago." As Kimball entered his 30s, he was going through a lot. He'd been through 2 marriages and divorces and had changed careers a lot. Kimball and his second wife, Larissa Hentz, relocated to Spokane, Washington in the early 1990s to pursue opportunities in the lumber industry. Hentz recalls that Kimball was involved in a logging scam, misappropriating funds from his dentist and the bishop of his church. At their residence, papers were delivered by a court process server every other week. Despite this, Kimball consistently provided excuses and never accepted responsibility. Their marriage ended in 1997, and 2 years later, Hentz told the Spokane police that Kimball had kidnapped and raped her at gunpoint. But because the couple still had sex after they broke up, prosecutors couldn't charge him for rape. The following year, Kimball violated his previous probation, and the Spokane police began investigating him for his involvement in 3 counts of forged checks. As a result, he was sent to Montana State Prison in 2000. A year later, he was transferred to a halfway house in Helena, Montana, where he worked as a cashier at a gas station and he was required to report at the end of each shift. On July 29th, While working alone, he stole $677 and fled in a stolen truck to Alaska. He laid low for several months and became engaged to a woman named Catherine Curtis under his brother's name. He also forged checks for almost $25,000 in his brother's name using a computer and blank checks he bought at an office supply store. Eventually, though, the police in Alaska found him and got back $11,300 in cash at the hotel in Cordova where he was staying. When he was locked up in Anchorage prison, he saw a bunch of arrest warrants, so he began to look for ways to make himself useful to the police. He told several people that he had information about planned crimes that FBI agents might be interested in. To keep Kimball safe, the FBI transferred him to FCI Englewood Prison in Colorado and also had a man named Carl Schlaff contact him. Carl wasn't too excited about the assignment at first. He felt it was more suited for less experienced agents. But after talking with Kimball, he sees Kimball as a confident guy with answers for everything. He's not violent and can still win over a jury as a witness. When Kimball was released on a $10,000 bond in 2002, he relocated to Denver, where he set up an organic beef distribution company with $65,000 from his mother and brother. The FBI also provided him with a down payment of $50,000 and a cell phone with headphones to record criminal activity. Over the next 2 years, Kimball killed at least 4 people, 3 of whom died during his time as an FBI informant. 2 of the victims were girlfriends of his friends in prison, another was his stepdaughter, and the only male victim was his uncle, who also tried to kill his own son but wasn't charged for that. When Kimball first meets with Carl, he tells him that another inmate, Steve Hawley, who is serving time for bank robbery and has a history of escapes, is planning another escape before Carl notifies the prison. As a result, Hawley is placed in solitary confinement. However, this solitary confinement indirectly led to the death of an innocent woman. At that time, Kimball and Hawley came up with the escape plan. The plan was that once Kimball was free, he would drive his car through the prison wall and create a disturbance, while Hawley took advantage of the opportunity to escape. Then the 2 of them would flee to Mexico in their car. As part of the plan, he told Kimball to contact his girlfriend, Leanne Emry, upon his release from prison and instructed her to take orders from Kimball. Emry, 24 years old and was born in Idaho. She later moved to Colorado with her parents. As a teenager, she was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. As an adult, Emry became a stripper and married a Texas inmate, which led to her frequent exposure to drugs and other criminal elements. Kimball approached Emry in late 2002. Hawley was in solitary confinement and unable to answer or make phone calls, and Emry was unable to confide in him, so she became increasingly dependent on Kimball. In an email she sent to her cousin, Kimball was dangerous, but as long as you didn't have sex with him, he'll be your best friend. About a week after she sent the email, Emry went back to her parents' house. She organized her vehicle and then said she was going to Mexico to explore caves. Her parents thought this was her way of starting over, but shortly after Emry drove off, she called her sister. She told her sister that if something happened to her, to remember that she would always love her. As it turns out, Emry and Kimball didn't go to Mexico after all. Instead, they stole $15,000 worth of checks in 4 different states over the course of a week. On January 27th, Emry called her parents to say she'd be in Mexico for a long time, but in fact, she'd already returned to Colorado. A few days before Emry disappeared, she checked into a hotel in Colorado because an employee there recognized her in a photo while the police were looking into some leads. While she was at the hotel, Emry called her cousin and they spoke for 2 hours. During that time, Emry said that if Kimball knew about their conversation, he would kill them both, so she couldn't say where she was staying, only mentioning that she was staying with some corrupt cops. Kimball later said he invited Emry to go hiking with him. They drove to Bryson Canyon and the Book Cliffs in Utah. At the edge of the cliff, he killed Emry with a handgun. The next day, Emry's car was found in a nearby town. 2 weeks later, Hawley wrote to Emry's parents to ask for an update on Emry. At this point, Emry's parents realized that they hadn't heard from Emry in a while. Emry's father replied that he and his wife hadn't heard from her either. Hawley then told Emry's father that an FBI agent had contacted Emry, but when Emry's father called the agent, the person said Hawley was lying. Even though they decided to call the police were reluctant to investigate the case, saying that because Emry was an adult, she had the right to decide where she went. Emry's father then tracked her down using her credit card records. They realized that Emry had never been to Mexico. When they found out that Emry's credit card had been used to buy petrol in California, they thought she was still alive. But when they saw the actual receipt, they were devastated because Emry's signature wasn't on it. It wasn't until March 2009 that Emry's remains were found in a remote area near the Colorado-Utah border. The second victim was Jennifer Markham, the girlfriend of another inmate. She was 25 years old at the time and had moved to the Denver area with her young son. She was unable to find suitable employment and ended up dancing in a strip club. Kimball then told her that he owned several coffee shops in Seattle and suggested that she move there to manage one of them for him. When Jennifer asked her boyfriend about Kimball, he suggested that she take Kimball up on his offer to move to Seattle. Over dinner, Kimball, as promised, pulls out a cell phone given to him by the FBI to make a recording in an attempt to find more evidence of Jennifer's boyfriend's crimes. However, Jennifer just kept calling a witness against her boyfriend a scumbag and didn't reveal any more details. Not long after the dinner, Jennifer moved all her stuff to Kimball's place, getting ready to move to Seattle. She was never heard from again after that. Investigators later found that Jennifer's phone was turned off, her car was left in the parking lot until it was towed for unpaid parking, and she didn't respond to 2 payment emails. Based on what the investigators figured out and what Kimball said, the most likely scenario is that Jennifer was taken after she went to Kimball's house that night. Kimball tortured and killed her, then put her body in the trunk of his car and drove to a remote area of Colorado. There, he removed her breast implants and dumped her body in a creek. But when investigators tried to interrogate Kimball using a polygraph, he passed with flying colors. Lori McLeod met Kimball at a poker table at the Lodge Casino in Black Hawk, Colorado, in early January 2003. She was impressed by the way he helped his mother, who suffered from multiple sclerosis, to the table. She gave him her phone number, and they began to get to know each other better. Kimball told Lori he was an FBI agent and showed her a fake badge and a laptop with the FBI seal on it. That Valentine's Day, before Jennifer disappeared, was their first date. Kimball would sometimes disappear for no apparent reason, but he told Lori it was because he was busy with his FBI work. Then he said he'd been investigating the murder of a young woman named Jennifer. Lori had a 19-year-old daughter named Casey, who was a frequent runaway, accused of credit card fraud, and deeply affected by methamphetamine. But when her mother met Kimball, her life was also improving. She even got a part-time job, and it seemed like everything was getting better. However, she became Kimball's third identified victim. One day, Casey disappeared after missing a subway ride, and Lori couldn't reach her on her cell phone, and even when she reported the incident to the police, those same officers refused to investigate Casey's disappearance. They said, Casey is an adult, and as long as she doesn't break the law, she's allowed to disappear. A few days later, when Kimball came back, he actually agreed with the police's absurd view and assured Lori that Casey would eventually go home. He also promised Lori that he would see if his FBI connections could help her find Casey. That summer, the owner of the property Lori rented in Adams County told her that Casey and her boyfriend had been seen driving by. So Lori approached Casey's boyfriend to get more information, but he told her that the last time he saw Casey was the day she disappeared. Not long after that, Kimball and Lori got married. He said it would help her move on from Casey's disappearance more quickly. They tied the knot at a wedding chapel in Las Vegas and then headed back to the Denver area. The first year of their marriage was pretty rough on Lori because Kimball was often away from home, and when he was home, he was emotionally abusive to his family. In particular, his oldest son, Justin, who was very mild-mannered, saw this as a sign of femininity and often called Justin Susie to emphasize his displeasure. In July 2004, Kimball and his kids were digging a hole in the backyard when his youngest son, Cody, came into the room and told Lori to call 911 because Justin had been injured and might have broken his leg. Kimball then went into the room and helped Justin out of the hole. He mentioned that his back was also injured, so Lori told the dispatcher on the phone. Before she hung up, Kimball put Justin in his car. Lori thought her husband was going to take her son to the hospital, so then she told the dispatcher not to send an ambulance. When Lori and Cody got to the hospital, they found Justin on a stretcher with blood all around him. A nurse told them that the boy's fall had caused some pretty serious injuries. Lori was confused and said that Justin hadn't been seriously injured before he came to the hospital, so why had his injuries gotten so bad? Then Kimball explained that before they arrived at the hospital, Justin had tried to open the window, but he accidentally opened the door and fell off the car at a speed of 60 miles per hour. Hearing about this, Kimball's mother went back to her office and changed the beneficiary of Justin's life insurance policy from Kimball to herself. She thought that Kimball might have been trying to kill his son to get the insurance money. 2 weeks later, Justin woke up from his coma. When he was able to speak again, he asked, "Why did Dad do this to me?" because he remembered that his father had pushed him out of the car. The neurosurgeon who treated Justin said the injury might have affected his memory. The police also looked into it, but because the two injuries occurred in different areas, it wasn't clear which agency was responsible. No charges were filed, so the case was closed. A few weeks later, Kimball's uncle, Terry Kimball, drove from Alabama to Colorado with his two dogs to help take care of Cody while Justin was in the hospital. But Lori didn't like him because he was a frequent alcoholic and often walked around the house naked. He was also obese and awkward in social situations. Lori doesn't get along with Terry for long though, because one day when she comes home from work, she noticed that the furniture had been rearranged. Kimball had bought a white leather couch with a visible stain on it. When Lori asked about the stain, Kimball said that one of his uncle's dogs had thrown up on it. She didn't believe the stain was dog vomit and asked him about it. Kimball says that maybe he threw up himself and blamed it on the dog, but either way it doesn't matter because Terry met a stripper after winning some money in the Ohio lottery and decided to move to Mexico. Lori thinks it's unlikely that any woman would have found Terry attractive. Not long after, Terry's wife filed for divorce, hoping it would get his attention. She hadn't heard from him though. In the weeks after Terry went missing, the bank noticed some strange activity on his credit card. They later found out that a man named Kimball had used Terry's card to buy 21 head of cattle in his name for almost $12,000. A year after Terry disappeared, Kimball's father and his brother got an email. In it, Terry said he was having fun in Mexico and wasn't planning to come back anytime soon. Then they never heard from him again until 2009, when his body was found in a remote mountain pass near Vail, Colorado. By late 2005, Kimball and Lori's marriage was on the rocks. Kimball was leaving the house a lot, had lost interest in finding Casey, and Lori suspected that Kimball was having an affair with a woman in California because he was going there a lot to see her. That summer, Kimball called the police twice, claiming Lori was abusing him. This led to Lori's 2 arrests. She later said both incidents were fabricated. She believed that when she was arrested, Kimball would be able to bring the woman he was having an affair with to their home. A detective named Gary Thatcher got in touch with Lori because he and his employer had discovered a lot about Kimball, including that he forged checks and stole. When Lori heard this, she got pretty nervous and asked to go to the police station to talk it over. Thatcher then asked Lori about Kimball's job, and she said her husband was working for the FBI. But Thatcher thought Kimball might be pretending to be an agent as part of a scam. So Thatcher and Lori shared what they knew, and she also told Thatcher about Casey's disappearance and her growing suspicion that Kimball was responsible. At this point, the two realized that Kimball might be a serial killer in addition to being a liar and a counterfeiter. When they told the FBI what they knew, they sent a few investigators to get ready to arrest Kimball. They first got Kimball's new cell phone number from Lori, and then found the place where he'd been staying for a while in California. The investigators thought he might still be there, so they told the local police and got ready to arrest him. On the afternoon of March 14th, Kimball was driving a pickup truck on the freeway when several investigators gave chase in several police cars. At that point, Kimball called Lori, who asked him to turn himself in. He refused, saying that the police would kill him because they were afraid he would tell the truth. As the chase continued, Kimball's car ran out of gas after driving 260 miles, and he was eventually arrested on the spot. Kimball was then taken back to Colorado to be prosecuted, and then back to Montana to continue serving his sentence, which was an additional 2 years in prison because he had escaped from a halfway house several years earlier. These sentences gave Thatcher some valuable time, which he used to bring murder charges against Kimball. Hence also brought up her rape allegations again, saying she thought he might have tried to poison her. Kimball's cellmate, who also took the stand, said that one night while the two of them were having drinks, Kimball asked him if the breast implants could be traced. When he said yes, Kimball seemed upset. Then Kimball also asked him if he would be willing to take something away from a dead body as a favor to his friend. The prosecutors in Boulder are also preparing charges against Kimball for his latest scam and are ready to charge him with probation and parole violations. Colorado law says that for repeat offenders like Kimball, they quadruple the sentence for the crime committed. However, they're not sure if they can put him behind bars because they think he's about to be charged with murder. Lori also went to the police and asked them to search her and Kimball's house. The investigators found some disturbing items there, including a hat from Casey's work uniform and her personal date book, as well as an email account and laptop computer in his late uncle's name, and a large number of rape porn images on those devices. One photo in particular caught investigators' attention. It showed a young woman who seemed to be in no pain and was just smiling. The woman was identified as Emry, who had been missing since Kimball's release. During the interrogation, Kimball didn't answer the investigators' questions. However, when they asked him about Casey, he told them she died of a drug overdose, probably somewhere in the national forest. In April 2007, investigators went to the Route National Forest near Walden. There, they learned that a hunter had recently found the skull of a young woman, and the DNA testing confirmed that it was Casey. Prosecutors offered Kimball a deal. If he pleaded guilty to recent counterfeiting and financial crimes and revealed the location of the other 3 victims, he would face only 1 charge of second-degree murder, with the sentence to run concurrently with the fraud charge. If he refused, he would face separate charges for all the murders, which could result in the death penalty. Kimball took the deal and led investigators to Utah to find Emry's body. On the way back, he told them where Terry was buried, but he forgot where Jennifer was buried. The investigators weren't convinced, thinking Kimball was holding out for future negotiations. So, with only 2 of the 3 victims found, no agreement was reached. And before his sentencing in October 2009, Kimball shared what seemed to be excerpts from FBI interviews with others connected to him. These excerpts caused some confusion, but the FBI later found out that they had been falsified while he was in prison. Ultimately, Kimball was sentenced to 70 years in prison for 4 murders and was not sentenced to death. In a 2021 interview, Kimball gave 2 different explanations for the murders of Jennifer, Casey, and Emry. At first, he said that all 3 women were trying to extort him or threatening to tell the FBI about his criminal activities. Later, he said the murders were connected to a motorcycle gang and that his uncle was a pedophile. But none of these claims could be verified. That same year, Kimball was removed from the Colorado prison system. The State Department of Corrections confirmed that he was transferred to another state but didn't say where. By July 2023, he was back in Colorado.